Hello students, this is Dr. Murthy here, and we are going to continue with the following chapters, at least till the school reopens, in an online manner. So this chapter will cover muscular system, and today we're just going to look at the general concepts of the muscles, and probably you'll start looking at different muscles on your own using Anatomy and Physiology Revealed. And I hope all of you are socially distancing and keeping healthy. So let's get started. So I could give you a list of muscles and you'll have to memorize it, but before that, you are already familiar with muscles because you use them every day, right? So we use muscles in moving around from place to place that you know of, and you use muscles to pump blood to different parts of the body, and other than that, you use muscles to generate body heat, chewing, defecation, pushing solid waste from your oral cavity to the intestine. You use muscles for facial expression. So the list goes on, including, talking, swallowing, pushing a baby out of the birth canal during delivery, urination. So these are some day-to-day activities that you use muscles for. So muscles, if we think of, we just directly think of, skeletal muscles. But from histology, you probably remember that there are three different types of muscle tissue. You have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscles. Now, we will majorly be focusing on skeletal muscles in this chapter, but we have looked at cardiac muscles and smooth muscles previously. And the smooth muscles and cardiac muscles are both involuntary muscles because they are not voluntarily controlled by us. Cardiac muscles contain striations and they have a special feature known as the intercalated discs. So this intercalated disc are these lines at the junction of two different cardiac muscle cells that you see. Now, the cardiac muscle cells are Y-shaped branch cells, and they are mostly uninucleated. You can sometimes find binucleated cells in cardiac muscles. Now, smooth muscles are also involuntary, but smooth muscles are non-striated muscles. So smooth muscles are spindle-shaped cells and they are uninucleate. So they only have one nucleus, and these involuntary muscles are found in the hollow visceral organs like the blood vessel, eye muscles, and the alimentary canal and airways. All of these places contain a lot of smooth muscles. Now this chapter will focus on skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscle is voluntary and striated. So these muscles usually, they're attached to at least one bone, and a muscle cell is called a myofiber. Well, I lost my control. Where is the control? Give me just a second. Oh, there it is. Okay. And skeletal muscles are multinucleated because as we grow and develop, these smaller fibers fuse into larger, longer fibers to form long striated muscles. They're long noodle-like structures. And the nucleus is located along the periphery of the cell. So you see these nucleus that are along the periphery of the cell. I hope you remember this from the histology lecture several weeks ago, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So these are multinucleated muscle fibers, and the nuclei is peripherally located. So Skeletal muscle, like I said, is voluntary, striated, and they are multinucleated, and they're about 3 to 30 centimeter in length. If you look at a closer image of the skeletal muscle fiber, you can see the nucleus. So this is the nucleus, and you see the muscle fiber. Endomysium is the connective tissue surrounding the muscle fiber, and then you see the striations on the muscles. So these are important characteristics of skeletal muscles that you need to know. The moment you look at a skeletal muscle, you can tell it is a skeletal muscle because you see striations on it. So these are striations that define skeletal muscle structure. So there are certain properties of skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles are, well, they are excitable, meaning they respond to a stimulus. So let's take a look at the properties of skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscles are excitable, meaning they can be stimulated with the help of an electrical signal. And this is usually done, not usually, always done with the help of a motor neuron or a hormone. So muscles can respond to hormones and the electrical signals from a motor neuron. And skeletal muscles are conductive. Conductive meaning they can pass the electrical signal from one cell to the next cell. And skeletal muscles are contractile muscles. Contractility is basically the ability of muscles to forcefully shorten. Okay, so for instance, when you flex your elbow, you need to contract or shorten the biceps brachii muscle in order to cause muscle contraction. So let's take a look at the biceps brachii muscle so you can get a better understanding of what contractility is. So when you flex your elbow, you decrease the angle at the elbow joint. That means flexing the elbow. Now, when you're flexing the elbow, notice that this muscle, which is the biceps brachii muscle, and other elbow muscles that are involved in flexion, all of these contract. So contraction literally means shortening of the muscles to allow movement. So these muscles on the anterior aspect of the arm, they contract or shorten. So keep in mind, when I say muscle contract, I mean muscle shorten. Okay, and muscles shorten to cause elbow flexion. Now notice that when you extend the elbow, just a minute, so you're extending an elbow, and while you extend the elbow, notice that this muscle on the posterior aspect contracts when you extend. Okay, so when you flex the elbow, the anterior muscles contract or shorten, and when you extend the elbow, the posterior arm muscle, which is the tricep muscles, contract. So the muscles can only pull, they can never push. Okay, so every time a muscle contracts, it pulls the other bone to cause a contraction or movement. So the next characteristic of muscle is extensibility. Extensibility is the ability of the muscle cells to stretch in between contraction. For example, let's consider elbow flexion. So in order to flex the elbow extensors muscles must extend in order to allow flexion. Okay, so the posteriorly located muscles must extend to allow flexion. Okay, this is called extensibility or stretching of the muscles. When muscles lack extensibility, It is called spasticity. Spasticity. I'm going to write this down. Okay. Spasticity. Spasticity is the lack of extensibility. Okay, so keep this term in mind because we'll look at some terms like flaccid and spastic paralysis due to bacterial infection. So just keep this term spasticity in mind. Now, the last property of the muscles that I want to look at is elasticity. Elasticity is the ability of muscles to recoil or bounce back after they are stretched. Okay, so these are universal characteristics of all muscle tissue. So the functions of muscle tissue include speech, breathing that we talked about. Well, significantly, the most important function of muscle is to help move the vocal cords. Now, when you open your mouth and talk and you change the pitch, when you screech your muscle cord, and when you speak in a very low frequency, the vocal muscle cords change their elasticity and contractility to allow you change in speech and changes in pitch. And by far the most important function of muscle tissue is obviously breathing. Without the muscle tissues in the around the intercostal around the vertebrae and the diaphragm, which is also a muscle, you will not be able to breathe. So breathing is very, very important function of muscle because that helps you keep alive. Now, the other important function is movement of the body, helping in maintaining body posture, and heat production, which is also important because the optimum temperature in the body helps in maintaining metabolism in the cells and keeps the cells alive, which in turn helps keep you alive. So when it's cold, the skeletal muscles contract to generate heat, and that causes body to conserve heat. Okay, so when you shiver, it's basically to conserve heat. So these are some important functions of the muscles. Now, if you look at different parts of the muscles contain an origin. All muscles contain an origin and an insertion. And in between the two, there is a belly. Now, just keep in mind, origin does not always have to be on the top end of the muscle. Origin is simply the attachment of the muscle, which is the stationary end of the muscle. So that is an immovable end of the muscle. Insertion, on the other hand, is the end of the muscle that can cause movement. Okay? So the belly is basically the fat muscular region that you see when you flex your arm. The big bump that you see is actually the belly. Tendons and ligaments are something that we have talked about in the past. So you see tendons over here. Now, tendons connect muscle to bone, and tendons and ligaments are made up of dense, regular, fibrous connective tissue. And what do you have on the bone, which is the outermost part of the bone? Now, that is the periosteum of the bone. So the periosteum and the tendon are made up of the same tissue, and the tendon merges into the periosteum of the bone. Okay, then I can see how the skeletal and muscular system are related. Okay, so the tendons attach muscle to bone. A group of muscle cells is called a bundle of muscle cells is called a fascicle. So in the fascicle, you have a whole bunch of individual muscle cells. So this single unit that you're looking at right now is called the muscle fiber. So a muscle fiber is simply a muscle cell. Each muscle cell is wrapped in a connective tissue known as the endomysium. So all the space around the muscle fiber is the endomysium. So that's the innermost layer of connective tissue wrapping the muscle fiber. Now, a group of muscle fibers is called a fascicle. So it's a bundle which is also wrapped around by connective tissue, and this layer is known as the perimysium. So the fascicle is wrapped around by perimysium. Now, a group of fascicles, this is a fascicle, this is a fascicle, this is a fascicle. Groups of fascicles are covered by the outermost layer known as epimysium. So epimysium is the outermost layer. The perimysium is the connective tissue layer around the fascicle. The endomysium is a layer of connective tissue around each individual muscle fiber or muscle cell. Skeletal muscles are highly vascularized all the way up to the individual muscle fibers. So they are rich in blood supply. So you see arteries and veins around the connective tissue, and they are vascularized all the way up to the muscle fiber. And they are highly innervated, meaning they contain a lot of nervous tissue connections. So the types of innervation in the muscle fibers include proprioreceptors that help in proprioception. There's a spelling mistake over here. So proprioception, also known as kinesthesia. Where have you heard the word aesthesia? You've heard of the word anesthesia, right? Anesthesia is something that is anesthetic is given to numb the pain, right? Or to numb the sensory output. So aesthesia literally means sensation or the ability to feel or perceive sensations. So kinesthesia literally means awareness of movements in different parts of the body. So when you wiggle your toes, you know that you're wiggling your toes. So you should try to wiggle your toes while we're talking about this so you know what this means. So you're wiggling your toes and you are aware that your toes are being wiggled, and that's called kinesthesia. So the muscles have a whole bunch of proprioreceptors that help in kinesthesia. I prefer this word because it makes more sense when you break it down. And then the skeletal muscles have a whole bunch of somatic motor neurons that help in voluntary excitation of the muscle that causes movement. Now, each motor neuron is capable of supplying nerves to hundreds of different muscle fibers, right? So a motor unit consists of one motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it stimulates, right? So this is a single, you see this, let's pick the red motor unit. So the red motor unit emerges from the spinal cord and connects to a whole bunch of different muscle fibers. So in this way, each motor neuron can supply hundreds of different muscle fibers. So a motor unit consists of one motor neuron and all the muscle fiber it can stimulate. So in this figure, you see three different motor units. One is highlighted in purple, the other one in blue, and the other one in pink. So we see three different motor units in this picture.